Hey, everybody, welcome to today's installment of Hearing God in the New Testament. And according to the Foundations 260 New Testament reading plan, we find ourselves moving from the book of Hebrews now to the book of First Timothy. And I love First Timothy. It is filled with so many good things, especially for those who are in ministry, but really for all believers. We're all called to be ministers in one form or another. But the situation is this: the Apostle Paul had a young protege named Timothy in ministry. And so Paul had charged Timothy with dealing with some situations that were in the church at Ephesus. And specifically, some false teachers had emerged in that particular church, and Timothy's job was to confront the false teachers and their false teaching. But throughout the book, there's just so much wisdom for what it is to look like for us to live out the gospel in the context of the local church setting. And so, as I considered what it was to highlight for my Hear Journal today, as Paul writes this introductory first chapter, he spends a lot of time contrasting what the false teachers and their teachings were like, contrasted with what the true gospel is all about. In verse 15, the Apostle Paul says, "The saying is trustworthy and deserving of full acceptance, that Christ Jesus came into the world to save sinners, of whom I am the foremost." Now that's interesting to me that the Apostle Paul would consider himself to be the foremost of sinners. Now we do know that in Paul's life before Christ, he did some really bad things, but for him to say, in the whole of world history, when we think of all of the really bad people who have lived and all of the evil that they have done, Paul considers himself to be the foremost of sinners. And really, what I think he's doing here is he's communicating what really is to be the appropriate perspective of every child of God, that we are the foremost of sinners. Now, I think that what's important for us to realize is that our sin is significant, not just because of the things that we do, but against whom we have done them. And so every single one of us has committed cosmic treason against a holy God who is the King of kings and the Lord of lords. And so, again, it's not just what we've done, but it's against whom we have done it. And you can't get any worse than committing cosmic treason against the King of kings and the Lord of lords. And so, really, what that does is it prevents us from playing any comparison game with other people, as if their sin is worse than my sin. I'm not as bad as they are. When we really consider again against whom we have sinned, we are all in this boat of being wretched sinners with no ability to save ourselves. And so we deserve death. Just like the Apostle Paul, we are, like him, the foremost of sinners. But the good news of the gospel, the good news of First Timothy, the Apostle Paul, is that by God's grace, we, as the foremost of sinners, we've been saved, we've been given life. And our only response to this can be one of absolute humility and gratitude and worship for what God has done for me, the foremost of sinners. By way of application, um, I can play that comparison game with the best of them. It is, or the worst of them, if you will. I can compare myself and my behavior to that of others. And I think it's especially easy to do that sometimes when we watch television and we see people who think differently, than act differently than we do. And it kind of puffs us up and it causes us then to be judgmental toward others. And we can have that attitude, well, why don't they get their act together? So that comparison leads to judgment, and that only reveals this wicked pride and arrogance that is in my heart when I do so. And so I don't know if you can relate to that. I do think that within the Church of Jesus Christ, this is a big deal. I see a lot of that sense of, well, I'm not that bad. But as I described earlier, we all fall into that category of being the foremost of sinners. And we must come to that place of recognizing that in the eyes of God, I was simply a dead sinner who was raised to life by God's amazing grace. It is only by his mercy that I am able to live. And so, as I considered my response, a simple prayer, which was first of all a prayer of confession. Father, please forgive me for the comparisons that I have to others and the way that they live their lives, those comparisons that lead to the sin of judgment. I am guilty of that sin. Once again, it reveals the pride and arrogance of my heart, which have no place in a child of God. It only reveals that we don't really grasp the gospel. We don't really grasp what it is that God has done for us if we have still those seeds and those roots of pride and judgmentalism in our hearts. And so, Father, please root it out and give me the humility of Paul with the accompanying perspective that I too am the foremost of sinners. And so, this message today is not meant to push us down into despair and thinking terribly of ourselves. That's not the point. What it is designed to do is to cause us to think highly of God, not so much lowly of ourselves, but highly of God and what He has done for us. And once again, that the gospel is only by His amazing grace, which He has given to me as a free gift, and not by anything that I have done. And so I hope that encourages you, challenges you, blesses you today. Looking forward to continuing on through the book of First Timothy with you in the days to come.